All right, so this is a good question. Who's actually left at wide receiver? So I'm going to split my screen right here. I'm doing this live, so I'm sorry if it's clunky. Oh, no, actually, we're pretty well. All right, here we go. So let's look at PFF. They do such a great job with this and try to get an idea of who is even left on the market. I will note that Jacini Anderson actually tweeted that the Patriots are pivoting to the draft to address wide receiver. Yeah. So if they sign any of these guys, I mean, one, there's not a lot of, big name options left, to be quite frank. That would probably happen through trade. So at the top of that list, what do you think of Marquise Brown?
So I like him. I don't love him. Like, I think that's a guy to me that, like, if you sign Marquise Brown, you feel good, but you feel like you need something else too. Right. And like, he's a good play, ton of speed there. But again, I mean, the Ravens drafted him to be Zay Flowers, and they ended up having to take Zay Flowers a few years later. So like that's the issue with me. And again, I like the player, don't really love the player.
I agree. All right, Calvin Ridley, RIP to those dreams. Those fun while it lasted. Darnell Mooney with the Falcons, Gabe Davis with the Jags. Odell Beckham Jr. and Tyler Boyd, a couple of veterans. Now, I mean, I don't love the fit because, again, Odell Beckham Jr., that feels like it's stepping on the toes of the Kendrick Bourne. Tyler Boyd maybe is a rotational slot guy with Demario Douglas because Demario does have, the concussion history just from his rookie season. He is an undersized guy, so I feel like this season you're not going to see him go over the middle a ton unless it's maybe deeper downfield where he can get over to the linebackers. But Tyler Boyd could maybe give you that guy where you know exactly what you're getting out of him. Uber consistent, great locker room guy, and again, can take more of those big hits because he's a big body. How would you feel about him? Or OBJ?
I'm out on OBJ. I mean, the previous injury concerns, and I just think the explosiveness is not what it was. Boyd, I'm intrigued by, but my concern about Boyd is he's playing in an offense with Higgins, as we mentioned, Jamar Chase, and Joe Burrow. So, like, how good is this guy really? Like, I think he's a pretty good player, but is he a guy to really invest in, or is he a guy that is no different than Kendrick Bourne? Like, that's my issue with Tyler Boyd.
I completely agree. All right, Curtis Samuel. If there's anybody on the market who intrigues me with any significance, it's Curtis Samuel. But again, he's not really an X. He's more of that Z. And I hate putting guys in a box because I understand that if Van Pelt gets talent, he'll figure out how to use it. That won't be a problem. We already talked about with Calvin Ridley. He was going to figure it out. But Curtis Samuel, reliable pass catcher, got some explosiveness, not great explosiveness, but, he can threaten some down the field, and he's a good route runner, although for him, injuries have been a pretty significant concern. What do you think about Curtis Samuel?
Yeah, I wanted them to sign him a few years ago when he was available. I've been a big fan of this player for a long time. And I think, look, you in Washington, like we talked here about the issues with Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi, like, I mean, he had Sam Howell throwing to him for most of the year this year. So I think he's a good player at 27 and a half years old, too. He's got that explosiveness. Now, you're right. Is he that guy you're going to line up out at X and say, hey, just beat a corner on the outside? And maybe not all the time, but that's where formationally, scheme-wise, I think you could, like, if you had a package with him and Bourne and Demario Douglas, like, you could find a way to work that and get a couple guys open, I feel like. So, yeah, I would sign Curtis Samuel. I like him.
Especially for under $10 million. That's a pretty good deal. And injuries and everything with that kind of money, it's fine. We talked about DJ Chark. Now, again, this is a guy who's more of an X. He's not really a downfield threat with any consistency at this point in his career, but he gives you a guy. He's not really that old, 27, so he'll probably be almost 28 by the time the season really gets underway or towards the end of the season. Not that bad. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and I know we talked about him earlier. I'm not anti-Chark. I'm just, I don't, like, to me, the description, and you can, folks watching, you can read the PFF description there. Like, if you put Devontae Parker's name at the top of that, I wouldn't see much of a difference.
Like, the exact same thing.
Like that's my issue. That, like, I don't think I'm not. Yeah, I'm out on, like, if they sign him for something low, fine. But other than that, not the answer.
Yeah, we touched on Michael Thomas, Josh. Now we're starting to get to the point where it's like these would be depth guys. They're not really making a huge impact for you. But what do you think of a Josh Reynolds type?
So if you're playing against the Rams every week, I love the guy. I mean, he was awesome in that playoff game, right, against them. Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. This is a guy that comes in like he's Kendrick Bourne's backup, and then, hey, you feel good as he's Kendrick Bourne's backup. But if you're in 11 personnel and he's one of the 3 starters, and the other guys are Bourne and Douglas, I don't think you feel that great.
I completely agree. Yeah, just looking real quick, Noah Brown would have been a guy I really liked. I was interested in him, but he's back. Actually, yeah, he's with the Texans again. Yeah, he's back with
Yeah.
the Texans. Yeah, Marquez Valdez-Scantling. The Patriots did have interest in him.
Too many drops for me, especially in big situations.
Yeah, I agree. Like it feels like another Juju and like not the same as Juju, because a lot of what happened with Juju was the injury. But it's one of those where it's like, oh, it worked for the Super Bowl champions. And it's like, yeah, but there is definitely a Patrick Mahomes effect to that a little bit. And then, yeah, we're getting pretty dark.
I mean, like, you get beyond these names, I'm like, okay, that's the 34th overall pick. Like, you know what I mean? Just go there. Yeah.
It's getting pretty rough there. All right, let's see if there's anything else in the chat. We're probably going to wrap this up pretty soon, just because this really turned into the how do we move on from Calvin Ridley show. Also, let me get that back. There we go. All right, I wanted to see a little bit more. Sorry, bud. Let's see what else we got here in the chat, or I'll look through some of the questions that were asked previously, see if anything is relevant here. Let's see. The beauty of live television. I think we kind of covered the draft. Okay, let's end on this one. We'll on to something a little fun, because a lot of these are pretty much things that we've kind of touched on. Actually, here's one. What's your feeling about the defensive players the Patriots are going after? Because it feels like the defense, the priority is even greater if you don't have that like wide receiver one type. And like you mentioned, I tweeted about it earlier today. The Patriots as a team were not as bad as they seemed. A lot of it had to do with the fact that they had quarterbacks who were consistently turning the ball over, missing opportunities. And obviously the offensive line was a mess, where even when the quarterback play was halfway decent, like, frankly, when I looked at the tape last season, I was saying a great wide receiver one like a T. Higgins would make everybody's job easier because he uncovers faster and you don't have to have as many plays to get down the field. But you know what else really helps your offense? When the offensive line can run block and when they can pass protect, and you don't need to get the ball out in under 2.4 seconds all the time. But, that's where I'm at. We already talked about the offensive line. We'd like to see a Jonah Williams to kind of get some reinforcements there. One thing I will actually mention before we actually get to the defense was City So. I spoke to him when everybody was clearing out their lockers on the last day of media availability. He touched on the fact that he felt like he was behind the 8 ball because he spent all of the summer at tackle, which even, anybody who was watching was like, this guy should not be playing tackle. I get that's what your plan was. It's not a good fit for him, at least not in his rookie year at this level. So I do have a lot more confidence in him because he understands where he went wrong was mostly technique. With Scott Peters, I feel like that's going to be a lot better in year 2. So hoping the offensive line is better. That'll go a long way if you don't have an elite cast of wide receivers. But defensively, who do you think would be a good add based on who's still available on the market?
So is this the point where I say the best person on defense available is Bill Belichick? Is that when I say it, or should I save that?
You certainly can.
Should I save that? No, I'm teasing. Yeah, it's interesting because I've said this and I've felt this way for a while. They have a playoff level defense. I mean, this has been one of the best defenses in the league since 2019. And here's the thing. They were 15th in the league in points per game last year, which I know sounds average. Their offense allowed 38 points on pick sixes and fumble recoveries and safeties. If you take those 38 points off, they were 8th in points allowed, like in the league. Like, it is a really, really good defense. So for me, like, defensive, like, I don't want to say like I don't want them to go after anybody. What I want them to do is I wanted them to re-sign Anthony Jennings, and they did. I want them to have an extension for Christian Barmore, and largely that's kind of and I have Duggar back. That's largely what I want. That, like, I really wanted them to go after Antoine Winfield because I thought that kind of free safety, he would have been awesome at that. He stayed in Tampa, so I'm not like. There's no defensive player to me like Christian Wilkins signed to, like, that's a guy I would have really liked here, but that was huge money as well. So to be honest,
it's like, I get it. I understand.
Yeah. So to me, there's not really any defense. Like, my priority right now defensively is re-signing Barmore. Like, there's nobody on the market that I'm like, oh, you got to go get that guy. Once Winfield and Wilkins are off the board, that was kind of, because even like L'Jarius Sneed, love the player. Do I want to give up a pick and an extension when I have Christian Gonzalez, Jonathan Jones, and Marcus Jones? And then I have Jabril Peppers, who was one of the best safeties in the league last year. And you have Doug. Like, I don't know if and again, love the player, but I don't know if I want to give up that cost when I'm already pretty good in the secondary.
And you mentioned Jabril Peppers. Like, let's think about Jalen Mills. He wanted to leave because he said they got 2 good safeties in Jabril Peppers and Kyle Duggar. I want to start somewhere. I've seen a lot of people mention Justin Simmons. Justin Simmons is not coming to New England. He's not coming.
Where's he going to play? Like, Adrian Phillips is another example. Like, Adrian Phillips didn't play. Like,
right. And then I think the third safety is going to continue to be Marte Mapu. I know people really want to see him at linebacker. I don't see that happening for a few reasons. One, Juwan Bentley is the only every down linebacker on this team. Jelani Tavai could, but they don't really use him that way. I think Marte Mapu will be used at linebacker. He was last season because in their big nickel packages, that's where you see not as much Peppers last year, but Duggar and Mapu would occasionally either be in the slot or they'd be in the box as that kind of pseudo linebacker type. And then you also saw later in the season, Marte Mapu did get some opportunities in that Mac Wilson type role to play coverage linebacker. So I think that's what suits his skill set. Like, you don't want the guy putting on 15 pounds and losing his explosiveness. Like, he's a playmaker. He can be a ball hawk. We saw it when he baited Patrick Mahomes into an interception. Like, you want him to still have that level of range. And if you have a guy who can play linebacker and have the range of a good safety, like, once the game slows down for him, he's going to be really good. So, again, he's their third safety. Justin Simmons, I don't think there's any shot. But thank you also, Nelson Lloyd, so much for the donation. We appreciate it. What about Chase Young? I'm hard pass, personally.
Yeah, there was some things I saw effort-wise in that playoff run that I'm like, that was a guy who had been traded. You're on the best team in the NFL in the 49ers. You're fighting to win a Super Bowl, but you're going to be a free agent. And I saw him not pursuing some run plays. I saw some pass rushes that he just kind of stopped.
Right.
Like, that's a guy, I don't want that guy here. Like, yeah, he's talented. I get it. And I don't think he would be very expensive. I get it. But just and I know it was only, a 3 or 4 game sample size at the end of the year and into the playoffs. But some of those things I saw, especially in high leverage games, I'd take a pass.
I agree. And I actually have the mock draft database big board for the wide receivers. If you want to go through that, see who can be.
Hell yeah, man.
All right, so let me get this off real quick. Thank you again, Nelson. All right, sharing my screen again. Let's see what we got. So let's talk about the scenario I think is going to end up like being a subject of discussion at some point. Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah.
Now, if it's Drake May at number 3, I don't want anybody else. I'm sprinting up and handing in that card. If it's Jaden Daniels, as much as I like him, and I would be completely okay with the Patriots taking him and building around him, that's fine. But Marvin Harrison Jr. is a guaranteed home run. Now, Drake May's not a guaranteed home run, but I think his upside is high enough that you're like, yeah, I'll gamble on his talent. He could be like a top 10-ish quarterback in the NFL.
Testing my skills on Prize Picks this season is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $1,000 with just a few taps. Use the code CLNS for the first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
But again, Harrison Jr. is automatic. So is he someone that you're even considering with the 3rd overall pick, or do you think this team has too many needs to go for a wide receiver?
Yeah, look, I would consider it, but to be honest with you, if I don't want to go quarterback there, I want to trade down. Because to me, the biggest question the Patriots need to answer, and you kind of just brought it up, what do they think of Jaden Daniels? Because there's a lot to love about Jaden Daniels. Does move his feet in the pocket a little bit too much for my taste. He's got some issues, but
bouncy,
yeah. But there's a lot to love about him. Guy won the Heisman, right? 4,000 yards, all that. If they like Jaden Daniels, sit there at 3 and take either him or May, whoever's available. But if they don't like Jaden Daniels, to me, that's the question. Could change the entire first round of the draft, because if they don't like Jaden Daniels, well, if May goes 2, then okay, yeah, you could take Harrison Jr., you could take Joe Alt, or all of a sudden now you could trade down. Like, you could trade down to 6th or 7th overall, and you could still get a Neighbors and a Dunze. Like, you could still get some of these
number
guys.
ones. Yep.
Yeah. Like, or you could trade down to, just say Atlanta at 8 overall, and like you could still get Olu Fashanu and have a really good tackle for years to come. So that to me is the biggest question the Patriots need to answer. And they may already know, but the biggest question they need to answer, what do they think of Jaden Daniels? Because if he's the guy, take him there, no brainer. Or of course, Drake May if he's there. But if they don't like him, then I think you start to trade down. So I love Marvin Harrison Jr. I think he's a terrific player. But I think if you're going to take a receiver in the top 5, you should already have your answer at quarterback and offensive line. And I know a lot of people point to Jamar Chase. They already had Joe Burrow when they took him. Even Calvin Johnson. And I know they never really were that great. They already had Matthew Stafford at that point. So it's like, if you're going to take that guy top 5, then I think you got to have, and it's like, we look at the Atlanta Falcons right now. They took Kyle Pitts at 4 overall. I wonder if they could go back. they'd say trade down or take a quarterback there instead. And now they wouldn't be paying Kirk Cousins, $180 million. And as much as I like Kyle Pitts, like, I think that's something that you got to be like, as much as I like receiver, I think that's a position. And I would put linebacker and safety in this category too, interior offensive lineman. Like, I don't want to take those guys high until I have some of the other positions already answered.
I completely agree. I do like the idea of taking the Washington boys. An Adunze, Michael Penix reunion. I would
Jalen
not.
Polk. I like Jalen Polk, by the way. He's like, he gets overshadowed. That dude's a really, really good player. Like,
I feel like there's just so much explosiveness in this class. It's like either you're explosive or you're huge, like a Keon Coleman, where like, yeah, he's not the fastest, but he's got a crazy catch radius and he's massive. I think that's why Jalen Polk gets overlooked a lot. But again, like you said, he's still a very good player. I got to figure out how to get this banner off. Okay, there it is. Because I was talking about defense there. But in this like first round range, so from this projection, it's probably going to be ending at about the Xavier Worthy level.
Yeah.
Who are some other guys that you're interested in? For me, like we talked about Brian Thomas Jr., the Texas guys, I think Xavier Worthy is not just a great athlete. I think he's a great football player. The route running is spectacular. Like, he really understands how to play the position, but the size scares the dickens out of me. Really makes me nervous. A.D. Mitchell is someone I like a lot more if the Patriots are like, hey, maybe I want to trade back into the first towards the tail end for a wide receiver. What do you think about the two Texas guys?
Yeah, so I like Mitchell better, and a lot of it has to do with the size, and I think the physicality there is there a little bit more. And the other thing, like you mentioned Worthy's route running, and you're 100% right. I wonder in AVP's offense, because in the old Patriots offense, running arguably was the most important asset because it was all timing and spacing, and you had to be in the right spot. It's not that it's not important in AVP's offense, but I think you can get away with a guy that needs some more refinement. Whereas in the old system, at the Patriots, like Malcolm Mitchell was a pretty good route runner when he started playing as a rookie. Like, he already could do some of those things. Whereas now maybe you can get away with, hey, this guy can play. It's going to take him a year or two to refine that route running, but he can play right away because our offense isn't quite as rigid on some of those and some of those reads. So that's why I like Mitchell better. I mean, Worthy, good player, but I like Mitchell a little bit better.
I completely agree. All right, let's move on to this next tier of receivers. We've got Keon Coleman, the big guy, crazy catch radius. People say he's slow and they like to compare him to N'Keal Harry. I don't think he's N'Keal Harry. One, I think he's much better after the catch. If N'Keal Harry was as good after the catch in college as he was in the NFL with that jump ball ability, he would still be in the NFL because that's pretty much Debo. It's like if you can win deep and win underneath, the people will find a role for you. So I think Keon Coleman is in a totally different category. Ladd McConkey is like, he's so good. He's just really good. He blew away the Senior Bowl. One of those guys like a Puka kind of, where obviously he tested better athletically, but in terms of the Senior Bowl, like nobody could cover him. And you can just see this guy's going to have success in the NFL very early on. Troy Franklin is kind of in that Xavier Worthy category for me. Where I'm like,
the only, like, and it's funny, and I'm sorry to cut you off. Like, he's just like, he's so thin when I watch him, and I hate to say this, but like I look at him, I'm like Tyquan Thornton. Because it's
better after the catch, though, I think, than Tyquan. I think he's actually got some wiggle and can get away with more stuff versus having to be in a straight line. But I see what you're talking
about. That's it, like, and that's fair. And like, because my concern about Tyquan Thornton when they drafted him is like, this dude gets widened on routes and pushed into the sidelines sometimes because he's just not strong enough when he was at Baylor. Like, and Franklin, that doesn't happen as much for him now at Oregon, but like, I could see that maybe being an issue in the NFL. But you're right. In fairness, he is better after the catch for sure.
Yep. And then we've already sung Xavier Leggett's praises. Like, if he's there in the second round, like, you take him. I don't care about a trade back. Like, he's a really good prospect. And again, they talk so much about like people. Like, we want people who are going to fit. And again, he was a team captain. He's overcome a ton of adversity. Brett Coleman touched on it on Twitter. Just a really high character guy who's also super talented. He gets some knocks for his route running. I think he's fine as a route runner. Like, is he going to be Julian Edelman? No. He's closer to a DK Metcalf where you only want him running maybe a handful of routes, but he runs them well. He snaps off routes very well, especially for a big guy. He doesn't let you keep your hands on him. And he's explosive after the catch, and he's a deep threat. So if you have anything else to add to Leggett, feel free. But because I could talk about him the entire show, I gotta keep myself contained.
No, I hear you. And the name right above him, Roman Wilson, is one that intrigues me too, because and it's kind of the same thing that is said about JJ McCarthy. Like, that Michigan offense is so predicated on they're gonna run the ball, they're gonna go play action and short passes and downhill. So I don't think we got to see the full complement of what Roman Wilson can be. when he was in Michigan.
He
Like
even said that. I think he was like, I probably should have gone somewhere else because I didn't get to actually play receiver very much.
So that's a guy like, and that's the thing about Roman Wilson. Like, I like the player. I wouldn't take him at 34 because I don't know if we've seen everything. Now, that's my third round pick. Okay, I'm in for that. I don't know if we've seen the full guy there yet, and that's what for him.
I agree. Ricky Pearsall is the only other guy in this group where I'm like, hell yeah, second round. I might want to trade back because I feel like you can get him in the early middle rounds. I don't think you have to go all the way at 34, but he's such a good football player. If they're like, we want him on our team, like, I'm not going to be mad about it.
And he's a guy too that I think with the quarterback situation this past year at Florida and kind of where they were at, similar to Roman Wilson, I don't think we saw even the full potential of what he can be. Because again, I mentioned earlier that highlight tape, he's doing all these crazy things that jumps off at you. But you're right, he's just a flat out good football player. Like you want, sometimes you just got to look and say, like, this dude's just a flat out good football player and take him. And I think we haven't seen the full potential there, but there's a lot to like there.
And Ricky Pearsall kind of reminds me of like a Jalen Polk, where you would look at him and maybe not think, he's just, again, football player. He's not physically going to wow you, but I still think that Pearsall can give you more vertically than a Jalen Polk. Like, that's why I think he's going to be one of those guys that's firmly in the second round, because you're still going to get some explosiveness. And unlike, he's kind of like with Ricky, because he not only was he not utilized, but with Roman Wilson, like JJ McCarthy was still a solid quarterback. Like Roman Wilson wasn't having to make crazy adjustments and, didn't really get to show that. Pearsall did, because he was having to make some just wild catches just to get that ball in there. And you got to see, okay, if Drake May does struggle with his accuracy early on while the footwork is still getting worked on, we know this is a guy who's an accuracy eraser. So again, Leggett and Ricky Pearsall, those are two of my guys. I love them. Now let's get into the kind of next tier receivers. We're talking more third round. Malachi Corley, the Yak King, I think is his handle on Twitter. Jalen Polk, we talked about. Tez Walker, don't love him. Senior Bowl scared me off. Unless you get him in like the fifth round, I don't really want to invest in it. Jermaine Burton has some character concerns, and especially with the Crafts, considering I think he assaulted a female fan after a game or something like that. The Crafts aren't going to let that fly. I don't even think he's going to be on the board. But Brendan Rice, we talked about, who's an X, got some positional versatility, really tough in his routes. I loved at the Senior Bowl. The first day I keep mentioning this, but it's just funny to me because I kept seeing people tweet saying, oh, Brendan Rice isn't getting open, or like, he's wearing coverage. I'm like, no, the coverage is wearing him. These guys are grabbing him. They're all over him, but he was still physical, fought through contact, and made catches. I love to see that, especially from your kind of big wide receivers. Then we got Jalen McMillan, Johnny Wilson. I haven't watched a ton of McMillan, to be honest, but I know he's more of an explosive guy. Is he more of like slight frame? Have you watched him?
A little bit. I think, he's not like, he doesn't jump out at you like the other Washington receivers do, but he's one of those, like, and you'll probably notice this, like he kind of finds a way to be in the right spot, which I think is valuable. Like, but I look at him like this list I'm looking at, like Brendan Rice is the guy I probably like the best, like of this. And it's funny, when I first watched him, when I watched a little bit of USC, it's like, I was like, is this guy a slot that they're playing a little bit outside? Like, what is it? Because you made the point, like he can do both of those things pretty well. And I like that versatility at that point. Like, again, he's the one guy on this list because, again, Walker has the consistency concerns. Burton has the off the field concerns. So Rice is the guy, like, if this is their fourth round pick, that like top of the fourth round, like I like that a lot.
Do you think third round is too rich for Rice?
Here's my issue with the third round. And I would say that about the several guys above him as well. I just think there's going to be some better options at the end of that second round, early third round, whether it's at receiver or at tight end, if they want to do a lot of 12 personnel like that's. And I think you had the stat when they hired AVP that the Browns did 11 personnel, like the third most in the NFL or something last year. So I'm not saying they're going to run a ton of 12, but if they did, I feel like that's a sweet spot. So again, I'm not anti-Rice, but I just think in the third round, you could maybe find one of those higher options there.
Yeah, no, and you're not wrong. And one thing, it's an interesting scheme because they ran like some of the most 11 personnel in the league. 12 personnel, they were middle of the pack, but 13, they were back up near the top of the league. They love to create those mismatches. They use their like 6-0 line packages. It's actually hilarious. I looked at the stats. When they use 6 offensive linemen, they never straight drop back pass, which I'm like, yes, if you're going to have an extra lineman, why would you ever not use play action? Just run and then force them to respect that and then play off of that. So those bigger bodies, I agree. You need the 3 receivers, but you also do need your big guys. And then I guess we can kind of close this out with, I think this is a pretty good place to kind of cut it off. So Johnny Wilson is an interesting guy, kind of more tight end size, where he's kind of like almost Keon Coleman light, where he's that massive guy who's not very explosive, but he does give you that crazy catch radius. I feel like he's just a good football player, where especially like the Senior Bowl, guys were trying to get their hands on him. That wasn't working. So they tried to give him space and then hit him at the top of the route. That wasn't working either. So I do think he's a better football player than he gets credit for. Luke McCaffrey is a guy where you see a lot of flashes, at least from like what I've noticed. Don't know a ton about him, though. Obviously, like from Rice, lower level of competition. Javon Baker, if he is there in the third round, then like, yes, I'm taking him immediately. I love his skill set. He reminds me also kind of like an Xavier Legette, maybe again, like an Xavier Legette light, where he's big, he's physical. He just is a football player. He knows how to get open, and he has great hands, can really go outside of his catch or go outside of his frame and make some tough grabs. And then Malik Washington, undersized guy who did really well at the Shrine Bowl. I would probably consider him more in like the 4th or 5th round range because he's so small and that skill set's a little repetitive. And then Jamari Thrash and Jacob Cowing, other guys who I think they're great football players, electric, but also undersized. What do you think of this group?
Yeah, it's funny. Johnny Wilson, he's 6'7", right? He's this massive guy, and that jumps out at you. You watch him like, holy smokes, this guy is huge. Only thing that worries, and I know it's not an apples to apples and a fully fair comparison, but it's like Darnell Washington coming out of Georgia at tight end. He goes to the Steelers. He's this massive guy, and he's been okay, but he hasn't had the breakout impact I think a lot of people thought he would, even in the red zone. He hasn't, and that's what I worry. Like, I worry about Johnny Wilson, just people falling in love with the side. Like, I don't like he's a pretty good prospect, but he's not like, to me, he's a firm day 3 guy for me there. And McCaffrey, I'll be honest with you, I don't know that much about.
You're not watching Rice every weekend? What the
No,
heck
I'm not.
that?
Unfortunately, I'm not watching. I know who his dad is. I'll tell you that. No, but I think McCaffrey is like, again, that's like that day 3 solid. Like, to me, that's like, we're looking at this list. McMillan's a guy I think could legitimately play. The rest of these guys, I'm like, they're going to start out as depth pieces. And you mentioned Baker, you like him. Like, could that guy pop, in not to use the Demario Douglas nickname, but could he pop and be really good and all of a sudden get on the field? Like, that's because I feel like even last year when they drafted Demario Douglas, there was a segment of people that were like, oh, this guy's really good. And like, he was, not at a premier school and people know this guy's going to play. And then he ended up doing that. I don't know. Like, I don't see McCaffrey or like Malik Washington. Like, I don't know if I see them being guys quite like, they're more developmental guys to me.
I agree.